Alright folks, so this is the brand new Garmin Varia Vue front light camera combo, and this has been kind of the missing piece of the puzzle when it comes to a complete cycling safety ecosystem. Rear-facing radar lights have kind of become a must for me, where I feel naked if I don't have one. And with this is kind of like a jelly to a peanut butter sort of thing, where this brings a front-facing camera that can record 4K footage along with a super bright headlight, and this matches really well with one of their rear-facing radars, like let's say the RCT 715. So using these together can give you a lot more peace of mind while also being able to record the footage while you're riding. Now the concept may seem simple here, combine a light with a camera and then call it done. Well, there's actually a lot more to it than that, and that's how it works with other Garmin products, like let's say their Varia radars, as well as their Edge bike computers. There's also a dedicated smartphone app, and it can also upload footage to Garmin's cloud-based storage service. So there's actually a lot going on with this device, and in this video we'll go through all the ins and outs and all the features and how they work, as well as how it performs in both the light quality as well as the camera quality, and of course if I think it's worth it. So first off, in terms of what you get with the Varia Vue, so you get the Vue itself, a USB-C charging cable, a Garmin out front mount, as well as the spacers for different size handlebars. There's also an adapter to mount the Vue to the underside of your out front mount, as well as a tether. And the Vue itself has a GoPro style mount on the bottom, which attaches to the included adapter, and then that adapter just attaches to the bottom of the quarter turn mount. So this makes it so you can just mount it and remount it quickly whenever you want. And by the way, the GoPro style mount on the bottom of the Vue itself is replaceable in case you break it. And then in terms of positioning, so you want to have the Vue flat and parallel to the ground as much as possible, which will provide the best angle for the light as well as the camera. And then for the Vue itself, on the front it has the main light as well as the camera portion, and then on the sides it actually has two additional safety lights here. And then on one side of the unit, there's going to be the power button as well as the camera button, and they have two indicator lights as well that can kind of tell you different things. And the buttons are pretty straightforward for the most part, where the power button acts as a power button and then the camera button saves clips. But the lights take a little bit more deciphering to kind of tell what they're actually doing. And then on the back of the device, there's going to be a USB-C charging port that's going to be protected with a little cover. And then on the other side, there's a slot for a micro SD card slot, and it has a 512 gigabyte max card size limit. And do note that it does not come with a micro SD card. And then finally, on the back of the device is a microphone for recording audio. Now for the light portion of the Vue, so it has quite a few different modes to choose from. So you can have it in a constant mode in low, medium, or high brightness. And there's also a daytime flashing mode as well as a nighttime flashing mode, or you can just go ahead and turn off the light entirely. And the light is definitely a pretty bright light here, where it has a peak brightness of 600 lumens in its day flash mode, and then 550 lumens in its highest constant mode. Now, bike lights are usually separated into two different camps. Lights that help you be seen as well as lights that help you see. And this is definitely one of those lights where you actually can see with it. Very well at that. Like on this example here, it is pitch black out around 10 p.m. in the middle of the jungle, and it's easily able to illuminate the trail well enough to even ride. There are certainly lights that are way brighter than 600 lumens, but I kind of find those lights to be really more intended for like trail or mountain bike usage, where this light's really going to be more intended for, I think, road, gravel, as well as like commuting. But in pretty much all the situations where I was using this light over the last couple weeks, I found it to be plenty bright. And again, I'm talking about pitch black situations, at dusk, in the city, during daytime. And again, it's going to be plenty bright that other people actually see you. And the Varia Vue also has built-in instant detection, like many of other Garmin's devices, where it's basically trying to detect an instant, like let's say an accident or a crash. And it's basically looking for an extremely sudden stop where you stop moving and don't start actually moving again. So it's not necessarily going to engage when you like come to a stoplight. It actually really needs that kind of like extremely abrupt stop. But when it does detect an instant, what it'll do is it'll actually save the footage before, during, as well as after that instant, so you can actually have that for your record. And the footage that it records during an instant is kind of like special footage, where this is what they call locked footage, where it can't be accidentally deleted. And this will make a lot more sense when we go over the Varia app here in just one bit. And then when it comes to battery life, so they say that it can last up to 7 hours if you're recording in 1080p using the day flash mode, and then up to 5 hours if you're using the 4K 30 setting. So certainly long enough for some longer rides in the daytime. Now, in terms of testing all the different modes and the battery life expectations, well, it was kind of impossible to test all the different scenarios, but between myself as well as DC and Rainmaker, we did test a few different modes out here. So when I had it recording in 4K 30, and I also had it set in the medium constant light mode, so it lasted about an hour and 40 minutes, which is a little bit under their 2-hour mark, at least for that setting. And then on another ride, I wanted to test purely the video recording without even having the light on. And after a 3-hour ride, it had a little bit over 50% of the battery remaining. So that's actually very much in line with Garmin's claims. And then Ray went out with it with the low constant light mode as well as recording 4K 30, and after a 3-hour and 15-minute ride, he had like 3 out of 5 blocks remaining, so that actually far exceeded Garmin's claims. But battery life actually can vary though, because the View can automatically adjust brightness based on the light conditions since it has an ambient light sensor, but it can also change the brightness based on the speed if you have it paired with compatible Edge bike computer. Overall, I'd have to say that the battery life seems to be pretty close to what Garmin's claiming here, but if you do need constant power, you can do that by plugging in a battery bank with using the USB-C charging port in the back. But that kind of gets us to one of the highlights, I think, of using the View, and that's going to be using it with compatible Edge bike computer, where they implemented the camera controls as well as the light controls really well here. So first of all, when you're on a ride, if you're recording, there's a little record button in the upper right hand corner, which is kind of nice to know that you're actually recording. But they also have these quick controls that you can access by just tapping on the screen, where you can quickly snap a photo, manually save a 2-minute clip, or just record and save your entire ride if you like. And they even have more settings that you can dive into here, like changing the video recording mode in terms of how it records footage, the resolution and frame rate, whether or not you want to record audio, as well as enabling and disabling image stabilization. But you definitely want to have image stabilization on the entire time. More details on that here in a second. And then additionally, you can even customize which quick buttons you want to have on the screen when you tap the screen, so you can just have the ones on there that you want. And then lastly, they also just have these larger buttons on the bottom which do the same recording and saving functions. And then for light controls, so these can be accessed through the controls menu by just swiping down to the top. So first of all, here's going to be your battery level, but I do wish it had an actual percentage here versus just a bar chart. And then you can also change the light modes, where you can change it from the auto setting, which automatically adjusts the brightness using the built-in ambient light sensor. And this is the setting that they recommend for road riding. There's also a high visibility setting, where this sets it to the highest intensity. There's also a trail setting for, well, trail riding. And then there's also an individual setting, and this is really only going to be used if you have more than one light paired to your bike computer. Like basically you have a view up front as well as the radar in the rear. And then you can also go ahead and override those controls here too, where you can choose from a solid light pattern, flashing, as well as just turning the light off. And then you can also access more of the general settings like the light network settings as well as the sensor settings themselves. But in addition to using it with the Edge bike computer, they also have the Varia app for both iOS as well as Android. So here's where you control the camera as well as dive into all the settings like adjusting data overlays and such. And then you can also view and edit footage that's saved on the device. But in terms of how the Varia View stores and saves footage, well, you'd think this is kind of a simple thing, but it's actually kind of interesting. And we'll first start with how it looks in the Varia app. So in the app, when you go to the Varia View gallery, so there's 3 tabs here: locked footage, unlocked footage, as well as downloaded footage. So when you're recording, all footage gets stored to the memory card as unlocked footage, and it basically just keeps on storing footage until the card is full. And then once the card's full, it deletes the oldest footage and then replaces that with the newest footage. So it's basically just kind of like this loop, and it's separated out into 10-minute chunks inside the app. However, then there's also locked footage, and locked footage can be 2 different things. This footage can be either from an instant detection or a footage that's specifically saved when you press the camera button on the side of the View itself, or if you press one of those save buttons from the Edge bike computer. So this footage, being locked footage, should theoretically never be erased from the memory card unless you specifically do so. So this footage is basically footage that you really want or need to keep for some reason or another. And it's pretty similar to with how it gets stored in the memory card, but a little bit more organized here, where it has a folder structure for unsaved footage, saved footage, locked footage, as well as photos. However, one thing that's kind of interesting though is that the footage that's saved on the memory card, at least the actual files, those are 2-minute chunks versus the 10-minute chunks that you see in the Varia app. I'm with you, it's definitely all a little bit confusing. But we're actually not done yet. So saved or locked footage can also be automatically uploaded to Garmin's Vault cloud storage service if you've chosen to actually sign up for that service. And it's actually pretty slick how this works, where when you just plug it into a charger, if you have it connected to Wi-Fi, it'll just start automatically uploading. It's actually pretty slick. However, it is important to note though that it's just saved or locked footage that gets automatically uploaded to Garmin's Vault cloud storage service. Unsaved or unlocked footage doesn't get automatically uploaded to Garmin's Vault, and this is probably a good time to talk about the cost of the Garmin Vault service. So the Garmin cloud storage service runs $9.99 a month or $99 a year. Yes, even more the Connect Plus, but this seems a little bit higher, especially if you compare it to something like GoPro subscription service, which is actually a lot less. Now the thing is, Garmin's Vault cloud storage service actually also works with their Garmin Dashcam. So if you are using both a Garmin Dashcam as well as the Varia View, the price may seem to make a little bit more sense, but if you are just using the Vault service with just the Varia View, that definitely seems a bit high. Now, getting to image quality, so it's basically about what you'd expect from an entry-level 4K action camera, where it has a max resolution of 4K 30 with options to record in 2.7K 30 as well as 1080p 60. And then it also does have electronic image stabilization, but this will crop in on the footage since it's using some of the original 4K image to perform the stabilization. And when you're in daylight, the footage is actually pretty good, but again, it's going to be more on par with a budget level 4K action camera. Like, let's say the GoPro Hero 4K, which I recently reviewed, and I actually say that the image quality is very, very similar between the two. And then in low light scenarios, so starting out with some riding at sunset, so you can definitely notice that the ISO kind of starts to pump up where the image starts to get a bit grainier, but the footage is actually pretty darn good here. It's really not bad. Now, I have to also say that the dynamic range is good here as well, where it's not really blowing out the highlights all that much, and it's also retaining a pretty good amount of details in the shadows. Now, for nighttime footage, so this is kind of interesting here, where it starts to definitely pump up the ISO much more, of course, but in terms of what you can actually make out, so what I found is that it may actually have to do with the light itself on the Varia View. And for the light itself, it definitely does a job by illuminating the road or trail. I mean, it does a really good job here. But in terms of the license plates though, so check this clip out right here where the light from the view isn't actually shining directly onto the license plate, and you can almost make out the license plate. And I think it's basically enough to make out at least some characters on the license plate, which may be enough based on your scenario. What's kind of interesting though is that when the light from the view shines directly onto a license plate, at that point you can't really make out the plate, and that's just due to the high reflectiveness of the plate itself. So basically what's happening here is that the light from the view itself seems to be actually a little bit too bright for the amount of dynamic range that the camera has, where it can't really account for how dark it is outside as well as the actual intensity from the light itself. So it's kind of like this interesting double-edged sword. And then for image stabilization, again, this is probably what you can expect out of a basic action camera, where it works really well for removing any road vibrations as well as keeping the image relatively stable. And it's also pretty good at smoother gravel riding, where it can smooth out some of those rougher roads. Where I find the image stabilization to not work as well though is when you actually stand up to pedal, where your bike is kind of moving side to side, and it basically seems a little bit too unstable here. And it's also really not going to be that amazing though for rougher trails or anything like that. So this really goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where I don't really think this is going to be meant for mountain biking, where this is going to be better for road as well as gravel riding as well as commuting. And then for completely dark pitch black conditions, so here's where the image gets pretty grainy though, but this isn't truly pitch black conditions. So this is basically going to look like you're in a Blair Witch Project movie or something like that. But ultimately, they aren't marketing this camera as an action camera. They're really marketing this more as a safety device. So again, that's really going to be where it's going to be more for road, gravel, as well as commuting versus something like mountain biking. But I do have to say though that the image quality is certainly good enough to prove that DC Rainmaker led you on a bad route and got you lost in a cornfield, and the only escape was to go through a gauntlet of angry dogs. And then the View also does have a built-in mic on the back of the device, so this is going to be where it's going to be better for first-person audio versus like third-person audio.
Okay, so this is a microphone check of the Varia View, just starting out. Maybe 10 miles an hour right now. Start speeding up a bit. So probably about 15 miles an hour. Probably going about 20 now. There's a little bit of wind as well. So this is what the microphone sounds like on the Varia View.
So the microphone quality is actually pretty good when you're standing still up to maybe 10 miles an hour, but after that it starts to get pretty muddled. You still sort of can make things out though, so I guess it's really going to be up to what kind of scenario where you're going to need that audio. But again, I think it goes back to that whole scenario of action camera versus safety camera, where I think it can work in most situations. But ultimately, I think the View does have a lot of good things going for it, namely the light, which is extremely bright. The camera quality is actually pretty decent as long as you have a lot of light outside, and the build quality is really good, as well as how well it works with other Garmin products. But that finally gets us to price, and quite frankly, this is not a cheap device. And if you take the price of, let's say, a budget action camera along with light that's even brighter than 600 lumens, well, you can get out way cheaper than this. But I also don't think it's fair to compare this with individual components, because this really is all about putting all those pieces into one cohesive package, as well as how well it works with the Garmin ecosystem. But that's really where this is more than the sum of its parts, where it just works well with the Garmin's other products. Now, if you are just looking for a really good action camera as well as a really good bike light, and you don't necessarily have other Garmin products, I'd say probably just go out and get those other products. But if you do live within the Garmin ecosystem, I think it's something to consider. Anyhow, if you found the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and just quickly hit that like button, and also subscribe to the channel for plenty more sports tech videos that are coming soon. In the meantime, happy riding, and we will see you in the next video.